You don't have to fire 1,000 bullets to survive a war. Sometimes the hardest battle is the one you don't get to fight. My name's Arthur Weston. I'm 86 years old now, but some nights I'm still 21, boots caked in mud, heart pounding, and eyes fixed on the beaches of Dunkirk. Before I tell you what happened, do me a small favor. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe these voices from the past shouldn't fade away, then give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us bring more true stories like this one to light. Now, back to 1940. They plucked us from factories and football pitches and turned us into soldiers. Not heroes, just lads with rifles and a vague sense of duty. I was a steelworker from Sheffield before the war, never held a gun before basic training, never imagined I'd end up in France, watching our world unravel one shattered mile at a time. By late May, the Germans had us in full retreat, moving faster than we could comprehend. We fought rearguard actions, held what ground we could, and fell back again. Lille, La Bassée, Hazebrouck, names that blur into a desperate march toward the sea. Dunkirk was supposed to be our salvation. Operation Dynamo, they called it. Evacuate the BEF from the jaws of annihilation. A miracle, some said. But by the time we reached the beaches, it didn't feel much like a miracle. It felt like hell. The skies screamed with Stukas. Sand was stained with blood and oil. Burnt-out trucks, shattered helmets, lads crying out for medics who'd never come. We dug trenches into the dunes and waited for boats, for orders, for hope. I remember a lad named Parker, just 17, his first real battle. He tried to write a letter to his mum right there in the trench, but the paper kept blowing away. He'd fold it over and over, scribbling between air raid sirens. "Tell her I'm all right," he said. I don't know if that letter ever got sent. Parker didn't make it past the next morning. Our platoon was part of the outer perimeter, the line that kept the Germans off the beach while the Navy did its job. We knew we'd be the last to leave, if we left at all. And we were right. Orders came down for a final push east of Berges. We'd try to hold back a panzer thrust long enough for another batch of lads to board the boats. We knew it was suicide, but we went. That's what you did. We held the line in a crumbling farmhouse, bricks flying, rifles bucking, machine guns screaming till it jammed solid. The walls came down, and with them, our last sliver of defense. Surrounded, out of ammo, and Major Ellis, eyes bloodshot, voice like gravel, gave the order we all dreaded: surrender. I didn't feel like a coward. I felt numb. I looked around at the lads, just 8 of us left, and saw my own fear mirrored in their eyes. We laid down our arms, walked out hands raised. The Germans didn't gloat. They were methodical, businesslike. They frisked us, took our tags, herded us into the back of a truck. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. They drove us east in silence, days without food, water, or a clue where we were going. Men collapsed in the corners. Some never got back up. I held on to one thought. Mum must think I'm dead. We were dumped in a temporary camp near Trier. No real shelter, just barbed wire and shouting in German. A guard cracked me across the jaw for asking for water. Another gave me a crust of bread when no one was looking. Even then, things weren't black and white. The next march was longer. Bleak German roads, frozen fields, no dates, no news. We walked like ghosts. Eventually, I arrived in a place called Lambsdorff, Stalag 8B. I didn't know it then, but that would be my home, my cage, for the next 4.5 years. I wasn't a hero. I never got medals. But I survived. And in the end, that was enough. They didn't build walls to keep us in. They built them to break us down, one cold morning at a time. If you've just joined this journey, I'd ask you kindly, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it if it moved you. These aren't just war stories, they're human ones, and the world forgets too easily. Now then, Lambsdorff. Officially, it was called Stalag 8B, tucked away in Upper Silesia, near a grim little town called Wambinowicz, though back then, the Germans called it Lambsdorff. It had been a prisoner camp since the days of the Kaiser's War. By the time I arrived, June of 1940, it had already swelled beyond its limits. We came in by train, or rather, by cattle wagon. 40 men to a car, no food, no air, and one bucket in the corner we all tried to pretend didn't exist. When they threw open the doors, the light burned our eyes. The guards barked orders, rifles at the ready. I couldn't understand a word they said, but I understood the tone. This wasn't France anymore. The camp looked like something from a fever dream. Wooden barracks slumped under their own weight, their windows half smashed or boarded. Barbed wire ran in endless rows, with towers perched like vultures above. The earth was churned up mud, and the air smelled of sweat, burning coal, and something foul underneath. They herded us into the delousing station, a cold concrete building where they shaved our hair, stripped us bare, and sprayed us with chemicals that burned the skin. Our uniforms were taken, boiled, and returned sopping wet. It was meant to stop lice, but I swear the lice were tougher than us. My barracks was block 16, 80 bunks, 2 to a level, 4 men per bed in the worst of winter, straw mattresses crawling with bugs, a single stove in the center. If we were lucky, it was lit twice a week. There was no privacy, no silence, and barely any dignity left. And yet somehow, it became our world. We were from all over, British, Poles, French, a few Belgians. Some had been captured at Dunkirk, like me. Others came later, from North Africa or Greece. One lad, Charlie Trent, had been in the British Expeditionary Force in Norway and never stopped bragging about it. Colder than Hitler's heart, he'd say with a grin. We formed a kind of brotherhood, not through choice, but survival. You learned fast who could scrounge, who could cook, who told good stories, and who you'd want beside you if things turned ugly. The routine was brutal in its predictability. Roll call at dawn, Appell, the Germans called it. We'd stand in lines for hours while the guards counted and recounted, sometimes in rain, sometimes in snow. If the numbers didn't match, we stayed until they did. Once, after an escape attempt in another compound, we stood for 11 hours. One man fainted and never got back up. Food was pitiful. A crust of black bread, some thin cabbage soup with maybe a scrap of meat once a week. Red Cross parcels were our lifeline. Tinned corned beef, powdered milk, cigarettes. But they didn't always come. Sometimes they were delayed, sometimes stolen. You learned to trade, a spoonful of cocoa for a square of chocolate, 2 cigarettes for a razor blade. Those parcels were the real currency behind the wire. Work details were the worst. They sent us out on Arbeitskommandos, labor detachments. Some dug ditches, others laid railroad track or worked in quarries. I was sent to a Silesian coal mine for 3 months. 12-hour shifts underground, coughing up black dust and praying the ceiling wouldn't collapse. A Polish foreman once slipped me an extra slice of bread. I nearly wept. The guards varied. Some were beasts. Sergeant Becker, with his whip and dead eyes, beat a lad named Whitley for speaking during roll call. Whitley later hanged himself with a torn blanket. Others, though, well, not all Germans were monsters. One young sentry, Hans, once warned us before a surprise inspection, giving us time to hide a homemade radio. He was drafted, just like us. I never saw him again after early '43, but cruelty was more common. We saw beatings, saw men dragged to solitary in the freezing dark, saw them come back less than human, and worse, some didn't come back at all. We found ways to resist, quietly. A stolen newspaper passed hand to hand. A forged document to help a Frenchman escape. We sabotaged tools, faked injuries. Once, we hid a Scottish officer in the latrines for 3 days while an escape tunnel was finished. He made it too. At least, that's what we hoped. No one ever heard from him again. The worst wasn't hunger, or cold, or fear. It was time. Time stretched in those camps. Days bled into months, months into years. Letters came from home, censored of course, and every word was gold. My mother wrote in 1941, "Your brother joined the Home Guard. Your dog still waits by the front gate." I read that line 100 times until it fell apart in my hands. There were two kinds of prisoners behind the wire, those who dreamed of escape and those who knew better. And sometimes they were the same man. Before I tell you what happened next, just a small ask. If this story matters to you, if these forgotten voices from war deserve to be remembered, then give it a like, subscribe, and share. Every view helps keep these memories alive. Now let me tell you about the men who disappeared. By late 1941, something in the camp had shifted. The guards grew more watchful, more suspicious. Rumors floated through the barracks like smoke. Someone had gotten out. Someone had made it past the wire. Escaping from Stalag 8B wasn't just a fantasy. It was a sport, a deadly one. Every man talked about it at some point, over soup, under blankets, during the long hours of roll call. Most of us didn't have the nerve, or the health, or the luck. But a few really tried. It started with digging, always digging. We called him Mole, Private Harold Hughes from Wales. Short, quiet, hands like spades. He could dig through anything. By the end of '41, he and two others, a Canadian and a South African, had tunneled from under the latrine in Barracks 14. Dug for 3 weeks straight, shuttling dirt out in hidden pockets sewn into their trousers. They'd scatter it in the yard, beneath the floorboards, even in the soup when no one was looking. The night they went for it, I remember sitting in silence, holding my breath as the others pretended to sleep. We heard nothing, just the wind rattling the shutters. By morning, their beds were still empty. That day, no roll call, no barking orders, just silence, then sirens. The guards tore through the camp like a pack of wolves. Dogs, boots, rifles, shouts in German. They found the tunnel, of course. They always did, eventually. They caught the Canadian 2 days later in a barn outside Lambsdorff, shot in the leg by a local farmer, dragged him back, bleeding and broken. I'll never forget his eyes, defiant, even in agony. They beat him in the square for everyone to see. The South African made it nearly to the Czech border. They brought him back in chains. He wouldn't speak for a week. Harold disappeared, vanished into history. Maybe he died in the woods. Maybe he crossed the border. Or maybe he's still out there, buried in snow somewhere. I like to believe he made it. But escape came with a price. After the attempt, they punished us all. No parcels for 6 weeks, rations halved, roll call doubled, a collective punishment. That's what they called it. But it was more than that. It was a message. Hope costs everyone. They shut down work details, turned the barracks inside out, and reassigned the guards. A new sergeant came, Reiner, tall, stiff-backed, with cold eyes and a reputation from Stalag Luft 1. He didn't beat us often. He didn't have to. He made rules bend like wire. Quiet threats, quiet cruelty. The camp felt tighter, colder. Even our laughter became whisper-thin. And yet, the spirit didn't die. Not really. A month later, we started a second tunnel, this time beneath the stove in the wash house. It was never finished. A cave-in nearly buried 2 French lads. We dug them out, but after that, the will seemed to fade. Still, there were always ideas. A stolen map, a guard uniform sewn from scraps, forged passes, compass made from a magnetized razor blade and a piece of straw. We'd test it in soup bowls, spinning it like fate. Sometimes it pointed north. Sometimes it just spun, like we did. One man, Flight Lieutenant Alan Tovey, captured in North Africa, used to say, "Escape is the duty of every officer." He meant it. He tried 4 times, got shot in the foot on the last go. They transferred him to Colditz after that. We never saw him again either. Not everyone approved of escape attempts. Some resented them, resented the punishment, the risk. I understood that. When your stomach's empty and your boots are falling apart, it's hard to get behind some dreamer digging in the dark. But at the same time, what else was there? Hope is a strange thing. It keeps you breathing, but it can also kill you. I never tried to escape myself, not properly. I thought about it every day, drew maps in my head, watched the guard rotations, memorized the sound of the siren tower switching over at midnight. But I always stopped short. Maybe I was scared. Maybe I was waiting for someone to come rescue us. Maybe I just didn't believe the war would go on much longer. But men like Mole, they didn't wait. And for that, I still admire them. There are winters that pass, and then there are winters that stay with you. Years later, I still wake up cold, not in my bones, but in my soul. Before we dive in, a quick reminder. If this story means something to you, if hearing the real voices of war matters, please like, subscribe, and share it. These stories are fading fast, and your support helps keep them alive. Now back to the frostbitten heart of captivity. The winter of 1941 bled into 1942 like ink into snow, slow, relentless, and dark at the edges. At Stalag 8B, we didn't count days anymore. We counted shivers, we counted coughs, we counted the men who didn't wake up. I used to love winter as a lad. Bonfires, snowball fights, mum's meat pies on cold nights. That memory felt like something I'd borrowed from another life. Behind the wire, winter wasn't romantic. It was a predator. The cold didn't just freeze water, it froze time. Our barracks turned into tombs at night. The single stove might flicker for an hour if we were lucky, but most nights we slept in every bit of clothing we owned. Gloves with fingers cut off, socks stitched from rags. Some lads wrapped newspapers around their legs, called them Tommy trousers. Frost gathered on the inside of the walls. You'd breathe, and your breath would crystallize in front of your face. One lad, Private Biscuit Bell, woke up with ice in his moustache and said, "Well, that's a new kind of shaving cream." We laughed, because it was that or cry. Disease stalked the camp like another guard. Lice were everywhere, behind our ears, in our seams, in our beds. We had a rhyme about it. 10 little lice boys climbing up a spine. One took a bloodbath, then there were 9. Bit grim in hindsight, but humor kept us sane. Then came the dysentery. First one man in block 22, then another. Within a week, half the camp was queuing at the latrines when they weren't passing out before they got there. The camp doctor, a captured British RAMC captain named Halvers, worked like a madman. He boiled rags, scraped together herbs from parcel tea bags, even made saline from scratch. But he couldn't save everyone. I remember one bloke, name was Higgins, from Lancashire. Big, funny, used to sing show tunes while digging snow trenches. He was gone in 3 days, just vanished into the blankets. I helped carry him to the burial detail. The ground was so frozen, the poles had to use pickaxes to break it. We buried 5 that week, and still, the war raged on outside. We got news through whispers, coded letters, and the occasional smuggled newspaper. Pearl Harbor had just happened. The Yanks were in it now. Some cheered. Others said it meant the war would drag even longer. Red Cross parcels remained our salvation when they came. Spam, chocolate, powdered milk, biscuits. God, those biscuits. Hard as bricks, but heaven in the mouth. We'd trade them like currency. A tin of sardines could get you a new pair of socks. A full pack of Players cigarettes. You could name your price. We used to joke that the Geneva Convention was just a fairy tale, but those parcels, when they got through, reminded us that someone out there remembered we existed. The guards didn't always share that sentiment. Rainer, the commandant's bulldog sergeant, liked winter. He said it cleansed the camp. One day, he made a Polish prisoner stand barefoot in the snow for 2 hours for stealing turnip peelings. The poor man lost 3 toes. After that, some of us smuggled scraps to the Poles when we could. We had little, but we weren't animals. Despite it all, there were glimmers. On Christmas Eve, 1941, someone, no one ever claimed credit, carved a tiny nativity scene out of bread, used matchsticks for legs, molded the figures from stale crust. We placed it on the center stove, gathered round, and sang Silent Night in 6 different accents. For 5 minutes, we weren't prisoners, we were brothers. New Year's Eve, we passed around a tin cup filled with potato schnapps, brewed in secret from peelings and hoarded sugar cubes. It tasted like petrol and nearly blinded Jenkins, but we all drank. One Scottish lad, McTavish, stood on a table and toasted, "To next winter, may we face it free or not at all." We cheered, even though most of us knew we'd still be there. That winter took a piece of me. Not just the weight I lost, nearly 4 stone by spring, but something quieter, something you can't stitch up. You stop planning, you stop hoping, you just focus on staying upright. Some didn't. A Welshman named Tom Price, always smiling, always humming, hanged himself in the lavatory on a Sunday morning, left no note, just didn't want to go through another winter, he said to someone the day before. We tried not to talk about it, but we all felt it, like frostbite of the heart. By the time the snow melted, we looked like shadows of ourselves, hollow cheeks, cracked lips, eyes that had seen too much and hoped too little. We thought the camp was the worst of it. We were wrong. Beyond the wire lay something even darker, work without end, and dignity ground to dust beneath the boots of men in grey. Before we begin, a gentle reminder. If you're finding something real in these stories, if they bring history to life in a way books don't, then please like, subscribe, and share this video. These stories deserve more than silence. Now, let me tell you about the Labour Commandos. By mid-1942, I'd been in Stalag 8B for over 2 years. My body had shrunk, but my spirit had hardened like old leather. That's when they called my name for Arbeitskommando 344, a work detail assigned to a coal mine outside Jaworzno in southern Poland. The Germans had figured something out by then. Dead men don't dig, but half-starved ones do, especially if they think it'll keep them alive a little longer. We were marched from Lambsdorff in a column of 60 men, boots flapping, cuffs torn, packs slung with more thread than cloth. The journey took 3 days, sleeping in barns or open fields, guards on all sides, some of them just boys in grey-green uniforms, their faces as pale and cold as the countryside we trudged through. The mine at Jaworzno was a black mouth that never closed. Smoke poured from its chimneys day and night. We weren't told much, just handed picks, helmets, and orders barked in German or broken Polish. Our barracks was a long wooden hut near the edge of the mine, 20 men to a room, rats included. Each day began at 4:30 a.m. No roll call, just shouting, boots, and the crack of batons on bunks. We were marched to the pit head in the dark, down into the earth in steel cages, like cattle. The air grew hotter, fouler, until the only sound was the grind of machines and the coughs of men swallowing coal dust. We worked in 10-hour shifts, hauling carts, swinging pickaxes, shoveling slag. No talking, no stopping. You slipped up, you got a slap, or worse, docked food. And food was life. We got black bread with sawdust in it, a few boiled potatoes, and soup so thin it looked like regret. I watched men collapse mid-shift. If you went down, they dragged you to the lift. If you died, they dragged you out and threw you in a cart. The dead got 2 things, a number and a shallow grave. That was it. The German overseers, not Wehrmacht, but civilians in grey coats and hard hats, were worse than the guards. We called them the Grey Men. They never yelled, never smiled, just pointed and waited for you to understand. If you didn't, they made you bleed. One of them, I never learned his name, had a limp and a scar down the side of his neck. He used to flick stones at us during lunch break, like we were pigeons in a square. One time, he knocked out a lad's tooth and didn't even blink. But even there, in that hellhole, moments of humanity snuck in like sunlight through cracked timber. There was a Polish miner named Stanisław, an older man with hands like shovels and eyes that seemed to see right through your misery. One evening, after I'd been coughing blood, he slipped me a boiled egg and said in broken English, "You eat, no die." I never forgot that. Once during a power outage, we were trapped underground for 6 hours. In the dark, I heard a German guard, young lad trembling, whisper prayers in Latin. I whispered mine in English. Maybe they met somewhere in the dark. We tried to keep a spark alive, even down in the pit. A bloke named Tommy Clark from Birmingham carved chess pieces out of coal. He used matchboxes for the board. Every night, after the shift, we'd crowd around and watch matches like it was the bloody FA Cup. The Grey Men never found it. Or maybe they did, and they let it be. But it was killing us. Slowly, efficiently. By Christmas of 1942, I'd lost 2 more stone. My fingernails were always black. My gums bled. One of our mates, Danny, slipped on the tracks and was crushed by a coal wagon. It took them 4 hours to find all the pieces. We didn't even get a moment to bury him. Just a number scratched into a wooden post near the fence. I wrote a letter home in January 43. Told my mum I was working in a mine of opportunity. I don't know why I wrote that. Maybe I didn't want her to know the truth. Or maybe I needed to believe it wasn't all for nothing. They kept us in that commando for nearly a year. A few men were rotated out for sickness. One lost his sight. Another went mad and had to be restrained. Me? I just counted my ribs and kept swinging the pick. But I also watched. Learned the guard patterns. Not to escape, not yet, but to feel like I still had control over something. Knowledge was a kind of rebellion. In the summer of 43, I collapsed in the tunnel. Heat stroke, they said, or dehydration, or maybe my soul just tried to leave early. They sent me back to Lambsdorff. When I returned, I didn't recognize the place. New prisoners, new faces, some old ones missing, but I'd survived the pit. You can live without food longer than you can live without a voice from home. Hunger gnaws at your belly. Silence gnaws at your soul. Before we begin, I'll ask once more. If these stories speak to something deep in you, something about survival, sacrifice, or simple human endurance, please like, subscribe, and share it with others. These stories aren't mine alone. They belong to everyone who never got to tell theirs. Now let me tell you about the letters that never came. Back in Lambsdorff, after my stint in the coal pits, I was thinner, weaker, and coughing like an old man. But there was one thing that brought life back to me faster than food or sleep. The mail call. It came irregularly, sometimes weekly, sometimes not for a month. We'd line up, shoulders hunched, like schoolboys waiting for sweets. The German clerk, under heavy guard, would shout out names from a list, tossing thin envelopes to trembling hands. Most were censored, full of blacked-out lines and clipped phrases. But we didn't care. A letter was a lifeline. Even a postcard could keep a man going for weeks. When my name wasn't called, and it often wasn't, I'd pretend I hadn't expected anything. I'd shrug, joke, maybe say, "They've probably just run out of ink in Sheffield." But inside, God, it hurt. In the early months, my mother's letters came often, short but full of warmth. She wrote about our dog, Toby, and the neighbor's victory garden, told me how rationing was tightening, how she'd traded a tin of peaches for a new pair of boots. I read those letters until the paper wore soft as linen. One line stuck with me. "We've kept your room just as you left it, your boots by the bed, your coat on the hook. Come home when you can, love." I read that in my bunk, curled under a lice-ridden blanket, listening to a man in the next bed sob quietly into his pillow. Some men got letters from sweethearts, some got Dear Johns, a few got photographs, grainy little black and white glimpses of another world. Those were gold. One lad, Jenkins, got a photo of his daughter he'd never met, a wrinkled baby wrapped in a hand-knit blanket. He passed that photo around like it was scripture. I never got photos, just Mum's careful handwriting, and once, a smudge of her lipstick on the corner. But then, in the winter of 43, the letters stopped. Not just for me, for dozens of us. Weeks passed, then months. We started whispering theories that the Germans were withholding them, that the Red Cross was blocked, that something had happened back home. Bombings, invasion, disaster. You start filling the silence with shadows, and in that silence, memories become louder than anything.
I began to dream of my street in Sheffield, the brickwork, the iron railings, the way the lamplight used to stretch across the pavement on rainy nights. I could hear Mum's voice calling me in for tea, smell her stewed beef, feel the weight of my father's coat, the one I'd wear when he wasn't looking. Sometimes I'd dream it so vividly I'd wake up and forget where I was, just for a moment. Then the cold would creep in, the cough would rattle in my chest, and the barbed wire would loom outside my window again. Those were the worst mornings. When letters did come, they were often outdated. A 6-month-old letter from home felt like a ghost's whisper. One lad got a letter from his wife saying, "We're expecting the baby any day now." The baby had probably learned to walk by then. Others got worse. In early 44, Charlie Trent from Barracks 10 received a telegram delivered by a German officer with no ceremony. His wife and 2 children gone, killed in the Blitz a year prior. He didn't speak for 3 days, just stared at the stove until someone sat beside him and held his hand. And yet, we still hoped. Every roll call, every mail drop, we hoped, because even silence was better than confirmation of the worst. Some lads tried writing every week, carefully crafted messages on thin paper, saying the same things again and again. "I'm alive. I miss you. I love you. Please write." The Germans read every line before they were sent. Some letters were returned, not approved. Why? We never knew. I wrote a letter in May 44 I never got to send. I still remember it by heart. "Dear Mum, if you're reading this, then I'm still breathing. They've moved me back to Lambsdorff. My ribs stick out like a bicycle frame, and my boots are more holes than leather. But I'm alive. Tell Toby he's still the best boy. Tell the others I'm proud, even if I'm not there. Save me a slice of that pork pie. I'll be home before you know it. All my love, Arthur." I buried that letter under my mattress. One night, the roof leaked and the ink ran. It looked like tears. Maybe it was.
There are men who escape walls, and men who carry them inside forever. In war, both kinds are heroes, but only one kind comes back to tell the tale. Before we begin, take a moment to subscribe and like this video. These aren't just war stories. They are testaments to the forgotten, the brave, and the broken. Sharing them is how we honor those who never returned. Now, let me tell you about the escape that shook our camp to its core, and the price we paid for daring to hope. I wasn't in Stalag Luft 3, not directly. That was the Luftwaffe run camp for Allied airmen, about 80 kilometers from Lambsdorff, where I was still held. But the ripples of what happened there in March of 1944 reached every corner of Germany's prison system, including ours. We'd heard whispers before it happened. You could always tell when something big was brewing. The air changed. Guards got twitchier. The commandants wore tighter faces. The Red Cross packages were delayed. A storm was coming, and though we didn't know it, it was about to change everything. Stalag Luft 3 was where the Great Escape happened. Yes, the one they made a film about years later. Only, in the stories told after the war, they left out the cold nights and the blood-soaked endings. 76 men escaped through a tunnel dug beneath the compound. Codename, Harry. Dug with tin cans, wooden slats, and guts. Absolute madness. Cold soil, reinforced walls, homemade air pumps. A feat of engineering and desperation rolled into one. We heard about it a few days after the fact, when the Wehrmacht arrived at Lambsdorff. More guards, more inspections. Our bunks were turned over, our meager belongings scattered. They lined us up in the snow and searched each man like we were all carrying secret tunnels in our boots. The camp's mood turned to ash overnight. Within a week, word spread, not through official channels, but quietly, through the grapevine that ran from camp to camp like a secret artery. 50 of the escapees had been murdered, not executed, murdered, shot in the back, left by the roadside like rubbish. The Nazis had called it shot while attempting to escape, but we all knew better. These men had already been caught. It was punishment, cold, brutal, final. One of the 50 was Sandy MacDonald, a Scotsman we'd met during a brief stint at Stalag Luft 6 before Lambsdorff. Sharp mind, brilliant with languages, always talking about the hills of Inverness and how his girl was waiting with a bottle of whiskey and a shotgun for anyone who got in her way. He didn't even smoke, traded every cigarette for paper, pens, string. Said planning gave him a reason to live. Turned out he'd used his talents to help with the forgeries for the Great Escape. He hadn't even made it to the woods. When his name appeared on the list posted at roll call, handwritten in German ink, black as grief, something inside me cracked. They had killed the dream of escape for most of us in that moment, but not for all. There were still those who plotted, quiet, tireless men, digging under fences with spoons, hiding in laundry carts, slipping through shadows during blackouts. Most were caught. Some were beaten to within an inch of life. Others were simply never heard from again. We called them the disappeared. I sometimes envied their courage, and other times I cursed it, because every attempt made the Germans crueler, more suspicious. Collective punishment followed, food rations slashed, Red Cross parcels seized, letters held. For weeks after the Great Escape, we were kept in locked barracks except for roll calls. It's hard to hate a man for wanting to be free, but it's harder still to suffer for it. And yet, we still admired them, quietly, in our hearts. There was this one lad in my hut, Private Harold Dusty Miller, who started writing names, just names, on the inside wall of his bunk, in pencil. For the record, he said, in case the world forgets who they were. When a guard saw it one day, he demanded he stop. Dusty stared at him and said, "You may shoot the man, but not the name." They beat him with a rifle butt and threw him in solitary for 3 weeks. But he never erased the names, and I never forgot that line. In time, we learned that senior Nazi officials had signed off on the killings, including Hitler himself. After the war, some were hunted down and brought to trial, but justice, like the mail, often came late and never brought anyone back. Even decades later, when I visited the memorial near Zagen in Poland, where Stalag Luft 3 once stood, I remember staring at the etched names of the 50. My fingers traced Sandy's. His girl had married another, I was told. She waited 5 years. That's a lifetime in war. Some prisons you walk out of, others you carry with you for the rest of your life. And the worst kind? They're not built of walls and barbed wire, but silence, time, and forgetting who you were before. Before we begin, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. These stories are not just memories, they're truths from another time, told by those who lived through it. Sharing them honors every man who never made it home. Now, let me take you back to the long, slow collapse of the soul behind barbed wire and the fire that refused to go out. By 1944, The war was shifting. We knew it, even without radios. The guards whispered among themselves. Food deliveries became more erratic, and the once proud German officers started wearing their uniforms like burdens rather than banners. But for us, the men of Stalag 8B, later renamed Stalag 344, time had become a swamp. It dragged at your limbs, blurred your thoughts, and suffocated every hope not nailed to the wall. I was 4 years into captivity, 23 years old, but I felt 80. They called it barbed wire disease, a sort of living decay. Not madness exactly, just the slow unraveling of identity. One lad, Tommy Cook from Devon, forgot how to speak English properly, started muttering in broken German. When we asked him why, he looked puzzled, like we were the ones gone mad. He'd been in solitary twice, the last time for trying to bribe a guard with half a Red Cross tin of jam and a wooden chess piece carved into a crude pistol. He didn't get punished for that. The guard just stared at the gun and laughed. We didn't. There were other signs. Men who stopped eating, not out of starvation, but apathy. Men who kept their faces to the wall for days, who jumped at shadows, who flinched at birds, and then came the fire. I remember the night well, late autumn of 1944. The bitter cold had returned early that year, seeping through our barracks and turning our bones brittle. One of the storage huts, where they kept confiscated Red Cross parcels and clothing, went up in flames just before midnight. We never knew if it was sabotage or accident. Some said a careless guard had dropped a lantern. Others whispered that a group of Polish POWs had started it on purpose, trying to destroy their own torture files. Whatever the truth, the blaze lit up the sky like some hellish beacon, and with it, chaos. The guards panicked, sirens blared, machine guns were mounted and aimed at the fences. Dogs were loosed. A handful of men tried to use the confusion to escape. 2 were gunned down near the perimeter. Another was dragged back, bleeding from the leg, screaming in French. The fire raged on for hours. In the days after, the punishments came hard and fast. No mail, no Red Cross parcels, no blankets. Some of the older men, especially the Poles and Serbs, were transferred to labor camps farther east. A few never returned. We learned to say less and endure more. But it wasn't all surrender. There was Father Brennan, a wiry Irish chaplain who'd been captured in 1940, like me. He wasn't just a priest, he was our spark plug, ran secret sermons in the latrines, smuggled pages from a worn-out Bible between soup cans and boots. He preached not of salvation, but of survival. His motto, "God's in here with us, lads, not out there in the chapels." One Christmas, he fashioned a crucifix out of barbed wire and 2 splinters from a bunk bed. A guard saw it, ordered him to destroy it. He kissed it instead and said, "You can hang a man with this wire or hang hope on it. Your choice." They beat him, but he smiled through it. And then there was old Gus, Gustaf Andersen, a Danish merchant seaman who'd been captured off Norway. Quiet bloke, heavy hands. He used to carve birds out of coal lumps. Every man he gave one to survived that winter. We called them black doves. He gave me mine the night after the fire. Said nothing. Just placed it in my hand and nodded. It still sits on my desk, back home. Charcoal wings chipped, but still holding flight. By the end of 1944, the Red Army was pushing west. Rumors of their approach reached even our frozen corner of Silesia. Some men rejoiced. Others, like me, felt a strange fear of what came next, of being marched again,
or worse, used as bargaining chips. The guards grew nastier, edgy. Some vanished overnight. Others started talking to us, asking if England would take prisoners after the war. Desperate men, even among the enemy. And all the while, snow fell. Not the gentle kind, but sharp, angry flakes that bit at your eyes and ears. It covered the camp in white silence, as if trying to bury it all. But we still whispered jokes at night, still shared the last biscuit with the hungriest lad, still sang, "We'll meet again," under our breath when the lights went out. Because even in captivity, even in the worst of it, we clung to one thing the Germans never managed to take: each other.
The war was ending, but for us prisoners, the nightmare was far from over. They told us we were being moved, marched, away from the advancing Allies. What followed was a journey through cold, hunger, and death that tested every ounce of our will. Before we begin, if this story touches something inside you, please like, subscribe, and share it. These voices need to be heard, not forgotten. By January 1945, the Red Army was sweeping westward through Poland and into Germany. Rumors reached us that the front was approaching Stalag 344, that liberation was near. But instead of freedom, we received orders for what they called the evacuation march. We were herded out in the dead of winter. No time to pack, no promises of where we were going. Just marched. It was bitterly cold. The snow was deep, and the wind cut through our tattered uniforms like knives. Our boots were worn thin. Some had no boots at all. Frostbite claimed toes and fingers as we staggered through villages deserted by all but death and war. The guards were ruthless. They pushed us relentlessly. No breaks, no mercy. Any man who faltered was beaten or left behind. Sometimes we heard shots. Not all were escapes. Some prisoners simply gave up. We called it the Death March. Days blurred into weeks. We moved like ghosts, driven by hunger and the barest thread of hope. At night, we huddled in barns or abandoned houses, sharing whispers and stolen warmth. Some nights, the sky was so clear you could see the stars like shards of glass, but even that beauty couldn't thaw the cold inside us. I saw men I'd known for years vanish along the way, collapsed in snowdrifts or dragged off by guards never to return. The weak were left behind like broken tools. At one point, near the village of Königswinter, a German officer hesitated. He looked at our frozen, broken ranks and said, "Enough." He turned to the guards and said we'd rest. For a moment, I dared to believe in mercy, but it was a lie. We rested just long enough for the commandant to receive new orders, move westward toward the American lines. As we marched through the Ruhr Valley, the war's destruction surrounded us. Bombed-out factories, rubble-strewn streets, skeletal trees stripped bare by cold and fire. The land looked like a corpse left in the sun. One night, a group of us tried to sneak away, just for a moment's peace. We crept through the shadows, but the guards caught us. The sergeant barked orders, and the punishment was swift. 20 lashes with a leather whip. I never saw a man scream so loud, and still, we pressed on. When we finally reached Moosburg, where Stalag 7A was located, the camp was in chaos, overcrowded, undersupplied, and full of men like us, broken and starved. News spread that the Americans were close, only days away. And then came the dawn of April 29th, 1945. American tanks rolled through the gates, soldiers with shining boots and cigarettes in their mouths. The gates opened, and for the first time in nearly 5 years,
I tasted freedom, but freedom was strange, unfamiliar, a mix of joy and disbelief. We were home, and yet not home. Some of us broke down, others stood silent, staring into the sun like it was an enemy. We'd survived the long march, we'd survived years of hunger and despair, but the war inside us had only just begun.
You imagine coming home after years away, and you think it'll be like waking from a bad dream. But sometimes the nightmare changes shape, and the world you left isn't waiting for you anymore. Before I begin, a heartfelt thank you for following this story all the way through. If Arthur's journey has touched you, please like, subscribe, and share these memories. History lives in remembrance. April 1945. The war was over, or at least that's what the newspapers said. The Americans and British soldiers had swept through Germany, liberating camps and crushing the Wehrmacht's last desperate stands. We, the prisoners, were free, physically, but free was a word that tasted different on the tongue. I stepped beyond the gates of Stalag 7A in Moosburg, blinking under a pale spring sun, my body a hollow shell of what it was. I was 25 years old, but looked like a man twice my age. The world outside the wire had moved on without me. I was taken to a temporary processing camp near Brussels, where doctors poked and prodded, where journalists asked questions I barely understood, and where families reunited in tears and laughter. But for me, the reunion was complicated. I traveled home by train through towns still scarred by war, bombed out buildings, ration queues, black market stalls. The air smelled of coal and hope, smoke and rebuilding. Sheffield had changed. The factories were damaged, many families displaced. My childhood street was patched and scarred. My parents' house was still there, but the garden was overgrown. The moment I walked through the door, Mum cried. Dad just stood silent, his eyes fixed on the floor. We embraced, but it was like greeting a ghost. Friends I once knew had joined the war effort in different ways. Some were gone, fallen in battle or lost to illness. Others had returned, but the war had carved deep trenches into their lives. I found it difficult to fit back in. I was a man who had lived through 5 years of hell, but I hadn't fought battles in the way others did. I'd survived captivity, the slow grind of loss and endurance. There were no medals for that, no parades. Sometimes I felt invisible, yet there was comfort in the little things. The smell of rain on warm earth, the taste of proper food, the sound of children playing in the streets. I found work at a local mill, helping rebuild what the war had torn down. I joined veterans groups, men who shared stories of battle, survival, and brotherhood. Together, we carried our memories like sacred burdens. We remembered the friends who never came home, like Sandy MacDonald and Tommy Cook, and those who had been lost in silence. And we learned to live again. But the war never really leaves you. It hides in quiet corners, in dreams, in grief, in moments of laughter that suddenly catch in your throat. I've told you my story because it's not just mine. It belongs to every man who found himself a prisoner before he could be a soldier. Every man who survived the long years behind barbed wire. Every man who carried the war home in his heart. Thank you for listening. If Arthur's journey, this journey, moved you, please like, subscribe, and share it with others. Keep these voices alive, because memory is the last fortress of freedom.